Soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. The dominant society loves its dogs. Why, they've made laws that allow you to bring dog in airplanes, even into restaurants and grocery stores, so long as you claim it's a comfort animal. Yes, authorized dogs can go pretty much anywhere. And in the society, that especially goes for its attack dogs. Well, as Neely Fuller said, white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the conversation. That's why we see the growing concern and fear from so many on the white left. They've gone from excusing the violence of all of these anti-black thugs to now trying to call for moderation. And they're just bewildered at why their attack dogs are only becoming more vicious. They're going mad dog on everyone. Oh yes, the chickens they had sent out are coming home to roost indeed. Black people pushed back hard against white supremacy in 2020. So the white supremacist thugs, realizing that black people had suddenly become harder targets, were now venting their rage on their own white leaders. These attack dogs don't care who they attack, just as long as they get to bite someone. And what softer target can there be than an office building full of middle-aged and elderly white folks? The white left is worried that their white right neighbors will be coming for them next. This is a case of one gang of white supremacists having outsmarted themselves. They've allowed these white supremacist thugs to attack black people with impunity. These race soldiers get bored with that, though, because there's no challenge or excitement in it for them. The society fully condones ambushing black people, just killing them outright. The media will excuse it and rationalize it and tell everybody why it's perfectly legal. And of course, there will be no punishment. But immorality begets immorality. So they inevitably begin going after other white people because that's who they have the closest proximity to, and because to them it feels sufficiently rebellious. After all, power can't be power unless it can be abused. The white supremacists are hyper-violent because that's what happens when you allow someone to become infantilized. When a baby is not chastised as a child, is never told no, is constantly pampered and showered with praise whether they deserve it or not, is never corrected or even criticized, well, what happens is that unruly brat becomes an adult. They wind up being ungoverned and ungovernable. They throw temper tantrums, except instead of throwing toys and falling on the ground bawling, these brats pick up a gun and they start making bombs. Right-wing mass shooter Kyle Rittenhouse, who likes to hang out with white supremacists, was invited by the white supremacist organization Turning Point USA to come to their little perverted confab and sputter a few words. What is this 18-year-old killer qualified to say? What could a punk who lied about being an EMT, lied about being asked to guard stores in Kenosha, who illegally left the scene of a double homicide, who didn't legally have an assault rifle, have to say to anyone? What political expertise can Kyle Rittenhouse possibly offer? Is this guy supposed to be some sort of intellectual, some sort of deep thinker? What is this punk known for? What has he done other than to kill two people in cold blood and grievously wound a third? That punk ran from the scene of a murder, and he's been running ever since. You haven't had any Rittenhouse sightings outside of a right-wing soundstage. Rittenhouse hasn't been so eager to go to any town since his acquittal. He's free, isn't he? Why, he's even got the same assault rifle that he used to commit his murders. So why isn't he back on the streets of Kenosha or some other city, protecting folks from Antifa or Black Lives Matters? Instead, he's been in hiding. He does these pop-up appearances, but he only gives split-second warning that he's going to be showing up somewhere. Turning Point's racist rally, however, was the only place where they felt there were enough fellow white supremacists in attendance that he could risk the organizers of that hate mob announcing that he would be there in advance. They have to praise Rittenhouse because they don't have any cops who are getting away with murder that they can point to recently. Rittenhouse being put on a pedestal because he's the closest thing that the white supremacists have right now to a win. They all fantasize about harming black people, especially the black folks who took to the streets to put white supremacy on notice for the last year or so. But as they saw in 2020, attempting to play out their little fantasies in real life, well, that would only serve to get them into situations that they wouldn't be able to get themselves out of. Even the thugs with badges, with all of their military-grade hardware that the government gave them, all of their military vehicles that the government handed to them, even they found themselves on the run. The white supremacists were humiliated by that, because the enforcement arm of white supremacy had been neutralized, and worse than that, forced to bend the knee in front of the whole world, to literally bend the knee. The shame of the oppressor class was that the people who it seemed only moments before had been untouchable had now been shown how quickly they could be brought to their knees. That's why the thugs with badges hold a special place in the hearts of the white supremacists. Dylan Roof explained that when he said he was scared to go to the hood to try some ambush because those were black men who he knew were armed. This is why so many of these cowards are in police departments. It's somewhere where they can ambush black people and not have to worry about being outnumbered. So the cowardly Rittenhouse, who has been on the run for the longest time, who has gone from assaulting teenage girls in the parking lot to gunning down unarmed people, this is about the best the white supremacists can do. Dinesh D'Souza, who is a convicted felon, by the way, went on Twitter and he felt emboldened enough to come right out and say what all these white supremacists have been tap dancing around. The government wasn't killing the people protesting police violence. That was his problem. And so Rittenhouse was acting on behalf of all of these white supremacists who wanted to see the protesters killed. You know, people like Tommy Lauren, if they're protesting, somebody needs to do something about them. D'Souza described the double killing that Rittenhouse committed as holding the protesters accountable. D'Souza described Rittenhouse as a symbol of self-defense and moral accountability. Moral accountability? I did a video called 7 Lies Rittenhouse and His Supporters Told, which YouTube soft banned by putting an age restriction on it and hiding it from search results. I showed you video of Rittenhouse admitting that he lied to the media when he claimed to be an EMT, and that he lied when he claimed that local businessmen hired him to protect their buildings. But considering that Dinesh D'Souza is himself a convicted felon, a pathetic criminal who committed crimes just to help the GOP, it makes sense that this is what passes for morals from a reprobate like him. The idea of some white vigilante being praised and glorified for carrying out murders isn't new at all. Bernie Getz became a white media darling when, on December 22nd, 1984, that's exactly 37 years ago yesterday, he shot and tried to kill 4 unarmed black men on a New York train simply because he didn't like black people. 2 of his victims he shot in the back. Getz was so terrified, so afraid for his life, that after he gunned down his 4 victims, he then calmly checked each of them to confirm if they were dead. He then shot one of his victims again just before he got off the train. He fled from the scene of that mass shooting. Any of this sounding familiar yet? Once apprehended, Getz claimed that they were trying to rob him and he was just defending himself. Naturally, he never provided a scintilla of evidence to support any of that. A jury comprised of 10 white people and only 2 blacks acquitted him of the major charges, only finding him guilty on a minor gun charge. He spent a few months in jail and was released. He became a cause celeb after that. The white media would praise him obliquely, though sometimes they would just go ahead and praise him directly, because he was a symbol of a white man who was willing to do what needed to be done to remind black people that they could be killed with impunity, that the laws don't apply to some people. The movie Death Wish with Charles Bronson had come out in 1974, 10 years before Getz went on his shooting spree. I'm not saying that that movie inspired Getz to try to kill 4 black men, because it didn't have to. White supremacists don't need Hollywood to prompt them to do that. They've been doing it nationwide for hundreds of years. Yet, Death Wish was a movie that came out during the waning years of the Black Power movement in the early 1970s. And it took place not in the Deep South or even on the West Coast, but in New York City. Charles Bronson's character, Paul Kersey, is not a former soldier. He's not a cop. He's not even a former cop. He's an architect. That's it. But it did mean that he was upper middle class, much like Bernie Getz, who was a business owner, by the way. That's what the Paul Kersey character was meant to be. He was meant to be a stand-in, an avatar for the white male who was upwardly mobile and politically active, which Bernie Getz also was. That movie was meant to specifically justify yuppies deciding to shoot black people just because. Like the Turner Diaries, which would be published just a few years after Death Wish debuted, these were works meant to justify white supremacists acting on their white privilege and committing premeditated acts of murder against black people. Death Wish is a glorification of the right of white supremacists to kill, and that society gives them permission to do so because black people just need killing. And on a side note, something that I think needs to be mentioned, Bernie Getz, who's still alive, by the way, is Jewish, and yet he became a hero in the eyes of Aryans. Just like George Zimmerman, who claims to be Hispanic, depending on who's standing in front of him, and yet the same white supremacists who are saying that they want Latinos to all be deported, they were only too eager to stick up for him after he murdered Trayvon Martin. One of Bernie Getz's victims, by the way, sued him in the 1990s. This time, the jury was comprised of 4 blacks, and they decided Getz should pay $43 million. Getz wound up being forced to file for bankruptcy as a result of that judicial ruling, and although he's never paid a single penny of the money that he owed for the attempted murder that he tried to carry out, nonetheless, the trial wound up economically devastating him. Because during the course of the civil trial, something was revealed that everybody already suspected. It was discovered that Getz had attended what were described as neighborhood watch meetings. And at one of those meetings, he said that the way to clean up the neighborhood was to, quote, get rid of all the niggers and spics. Getz also described his premeditated attempted murders as a public service. Sounds just like George Zimmerman, now doesn't it? This hadn't been brought up during the criminal trial because, as with Zimmerman and Rittenhouse, the DA in the Getz trial didn't want to bring it up. Kyle Rittenhouse is just like Bernie Getz, and I think the Washington Post's Richard Cohen, when describing Getz, also gave a perfect summation of Kyle Rittenhouse. He is not the response to the breakdown of law and order. He is the breakdown of law and order. He's free, like the looters he's always mouthing off about, a symbol of the lawlessness he condemns. That indisputably applies to Kyle Rittenhouse. That punk is a symbol of white supremacy's cowardice. He ran the night he committed his mass shooting, and he's been in hiding ever since. But that's not to say his violent rampage hasn't had some impact on other would-be killers. These white supremacist thugs are only becoming more violent. Their carnage must be stopped. And that brings us to the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power tools. Because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work.
And let the hammer fall.
White left are caught on the horns of a dilemma because they've
It's
been
smooth
giving
as
a
hell.
nod to all this anti-black violence committed by these white supremacists. They've conditioned these race soldiers to think they're not supposed to be punished. When people have been able to get away with a certain type of behavior,
That's not what he's talking about.
and not only not be punished for it, but be praised for it and have the media explain why these aren't crimes, then it's only natural that when someone tries to rein that person in, tries to tell them that the barbarism they've engaged in is no longer acceptable, that these marauders would become angry. After all, they feel entitled precisely because they have been entitled. You can't expect people who have been allowed, not allowed, encouraged to practice violence with impunity, with the praise and support of the government and the white media, to stop doing it on a dime just because you tell them they're doing damage, especially when you refuse to punish them. Words won't be enough to get these attack dogs to heel. I played that clip a couple of days ago where the Atwater explained that the Republicans were fully aware that their policies were hurting white people, but that it was okay so long as their policies hurt black people more. This is the philosophy of these race soldiers, rampaging through the Capitol, overrunning state legislative buildings, targeting health officials, making celebrities out of mass shooters. Expecting the same white supremacists who they've been emboldening and encouraging to calm down is like expecting an addict to quit meth cold turkey. And make no mistake, racism is their addiction. It's their unholy obsession. The white left think that these racists' obsession has only just now turned deadly, but that's just more of their own denial. For black people, these white supremacist obsession has been deadly for 500 years. Well, it's time that their addiction was stopped dead in its tracks. Black people have the right to live our lives free of attack and free from fear. Kyle Rittenhouse knows better than to stick his head up again and attempt another ambush, but then again, so did Bernie Goetz and George Zimmerman. We have to be ready to stop anti-black violence before they kill someone. That's certainly a better strategy than us continuing to wait for the next white supremacist to kill someone and then hoping in vain that the same injustice system that excuses these racist murderers will finally decide that the law applies to the white supremacists too. Well, over here in the B1, we're ready to protect ourselves because we understand that mad dogs can't be housebroken. Good day and B1. I'd like to take a moment to recognize some of our contributors. Troyce Donnelly, Breadman, True Soldier, Peggy Taylor, Isaac, Bucci, Josiah Starr, Lionel Clements, Jeffrey Shanks, Sean Gilchrist, Shabazz, and Mizra's B Life. Indeed, we should all be about that life. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black media only exists because of you.